Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have an 11 game slate. Starts at 1:35. Got a lot of games today. It looks like the weather's pretty good for all these games, so that's nice. With that said, before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Also, drop a comment below with your home run calls. Make sure to get those in there. And so let's go and get in the slate. My core plays here are Valdez, Toscar Hernandez, and Lane Thomas. I will do a quick breakdown of FanDuel after I do DraftKings as well, so just keep that in mind. So let's get into this DraftKings setup here. So we're going to start with Framer Valdez for Houston. Now, he's got a really good matchup here against Oakland. He should have his second best game of the season at minimum, which is around 20 or so, 25 fantasy points, I think, or 27, sorry. He had that against Atlanta. I expect him to be over that point in this game. This is a great matchup for him. He's pitched pretty well. He's got a good strikeout rate, and he's definitely one of my favorite pitchers on the slate. Then we'll look at Mr. Gosman for Toronto. He's got a tougher matchup here against Baltimore, but he has pitched extremely well, including against good teams so far this season. He's had two bad games, but he's had otherwise really good games. And, with that law of averages, I like his upside in this one. And Baltimore, while they are somewhat tough, they're no tougher than any of the other teams he's faced that he's done absolutely great against. He's been pitching really well, so I like his upside here. Then we'll look at Clayton Kershaw for the Dodgers. He's got some really good matchup metrics here. He's pitched really well, though he's been somewhat inconsistent. He does have upside here, and that gives him some utility. He also pitched against them recently, which he did really solid against them. I expect the strikeout rate to be pretty good. I don't really expect a 35-point performance, but I do think he'll be in the mid-20s, if not the upper 20s. Then we'll look at Andrew Heaney for Texas against Colorado. He's got a great matchup here. He has been a little bit inconsistent this season, and he's only had two games over 20 fantasy points thus far, but I do think he's capable of doing that in this particular one, and his price makes him a really good value on this particular slate. Then we'll look at Lance Lynn for this White Sox against Kansas City. Kansas City's got a couple bats that I do kind of like, but it's a good matchup, and he's been over 20 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. However, his one bad game in the last 4 games was against Kansas City, so that is a little bit of a concern. But he should be able to get some strikeouts here, and I don't think that they'll have quite as much success against him this time around. He's still a riskier play, but he's cheap enough that he is viable. Then we'll look at Justin Steele for Chicago Cubs against Philly. This is a non-ideal matchup, but he has a bunch of quality starts this season, and he's got 6 wins and nice starts as well. This is a tough matchup, and the strikeout rate is a concern, but he definitely has some utility as a kind of a contrarian option on the slate. And then we'll look at Creamer for Baltimore against Toronto. Now, this is a tough matchup for him, but Toronto's they've been kind of slumping as a team a little bit, and he's got 5 wins in the last 6 games against good teams, in fact, too. The strikeout rate's not that great. He is a Hail Mary pitcher on the slate, but because he's so cheap and he has some low-end upside. Maybe into the catchers, we're going to start with Sean Murphy for Atlanta. He has got really good home run potential here. He's been pretty good so far this season. He's got nice upside, and I like the matchup here against Kirby. Then we'll look at Will Smith, who for the Dodgers has been pretty good all season long, hitting the ball very well. He hasn't, he does have home run potential. He also has good batting average. He's managing to get on base most games, and so I do like his upside here. Then we'll look at Tom Murphy for Seattle. He has some really good metrics for this one. I like the upside. I like his home run potential here. That's kind of what I'm looking at with him, is a home run boomer bust type of play. But I think he's definitely capable for Seattle in this matchup. Seattle's a really good team to potentially stack today as well. At first place, Vlad Jr. has been hitting the ball pretty hard. He's got a lot of home run potential here. He hasn't hit one in quite a while because he seems like he's been in a little bit of a slump, but he definitely has upside in this matchup and a decent matchup against Kramer. Freddie Freeman is also hitting the ball extremely well so far this year, and he's got really good potential here. He's been hitting it great the last few games. In fact, 4 of the last 5 games over 2 hits. I really like his upside. He's got great potential, and I like him overall. He's probably my top first baseman. Vinny Pasquantino for Kansas City is kind of a high risk, high reward option today. He's hit the ball pretty inconsistently throughout the season, but he does have home run potential. He's hitting it well enough to be considerable, and his price is still pretty fair. Then we'll look at Ty France, who's a little bit cheaper, and he's got a great matchup for Seattle against Atlanta's Schuster, who's not a very good pitcher, so far at least. And I like his upside here. Has some really good metrics for this matchup, and he definitely strikes me as a good option. Nate Lowe was also considered as somebody you could also consider at this position as kind of a contrarian option against Colorado. I do like Texas today. I do expect there to be some home runs in this game, and I think Texas and Nate Lowe is definitely a possibility. Jose Altuve for second base. He's played 2 games so far now, and he finally got his first hit of the season yesterday. So I like his upside here. He's got really good opportunities. He will hit the ball pretty well for the most part, I think, once he gets going. And so this is not a bad spot for him, especially against Oakland, just pitching. Then we'll look at Marcus Semien, who's a little bit safer simply because he's been playing really well, and he's not coming out of his injury or not coming off an injury now. So I like his upside here. He's got great metrics and great matchup. It's hard to dislike anything about him except for his price. Tommy Edman is in play for St. Louis, even though it's a little bit of a tougher matchup. He's got some utility here. He has been hitting the ball decently well when he starts. Make sure he does draw the start, though. But Kershaw is a tough pitcher, so that's also an issue. But I do think he's got some utility in this matchup. It's kind of a Hail Mary approach, simply if you want to try to hit on Kershaw. Christopher Morel for the Chicago Cubs has been absolutely lights out since he's started the season. He's only had 2 games under 10 fantasy points on the season so far, as you can see here. And his price is still pretty fair, though if it gets too much higher, that's going to make him harder to roster. But while he's hot like this, he's definitely worth consideration. Austin Riley for Atlanta has been starting to get better, as he started the season pretty rough, but he has good potential here. Nice home run stuff, and he's a good price for his potential. Josh Rojas is a contrarian option off of him for Arizona. I don't love the matchup, but I do think he's got some utility here, and the metrics are good. He just hasn't hit the ball all that great so far this season, but he is bound to do so eventually. Alex Bregman is also in play here and a little bit cheaper. He has some really nice metrics here. He seems like he's finally starting to hit the ball pretty well. He's also getting some home runs, and if he can continue that, then this is definitely a good spot for him. Then Eugenio Suarez has really started to hit the ball well. He's part of a good Seattle stack here. I like his upside, and he's got good potential. And then for a value play at this position, Jake Berger is in play for the White Sox, as he's hit the ball extremely well so far this season, hitting 10 home runs as well, and has all sorts of potential in this matchup against Kansas City. Moving to shortstops, we're going to look at Corey Seager, who has some really nice upside in this matchup. He's a little bit expensive, but he's hit the ball really well lately, especially, and he's scoring fantasy points even without home runs. I like the upside, and he's got good potential here. Then we'll look at Trey Turner, who's virtually the same price here on DraftKings, so I really like his metrics. He draws a really great metrics today, despite the fact he hasn't hit a home run in a little while. I think it's been almost the beginning of the month, so I do think he's kind of due for one, and this is a great matchup for him to eventually do it in. Then we'll look at, in the outfielders, we're going to look at Acuna Jr., who's been absolutely on a tear. He's got a great matchup here. The metrics are off the charts as usual, and he's got good potential for pretty much every statistical thought you could think of. Jordan Alvarez is also in play as a contrarian option off of Acuna. He's hitting the ball pretty solidly. He's got home run potential every time up to bat, too. And if Houston can get going, especially in this matchup against Oakland, he should be a guy that's going to score some fantasy points. Then we'll look at Jordan Springer, who has really good potential here. He started the season pretty rough, but he's starting to hit the ball better now, and he even hit a home run yesterday. I like the matchup, and I like his upside in this situation. Then we'll look at Toscar Hernandez, who for Seattle is part of a Seattle stack, and he's really starting to hit the ball really well the last 5 or 6, 7, 8 games. I like his upside here. He's hitting the ball. He's cheap, and he has home run potential. In fact, the home run potential in this one is off the charts. And then Luis Robert Jr. for Chicago White Sox. The home runs have been coming. The hitting is improving, and he has been a threat for the White Sox. A couple guys on the White Sox look really good today, and he's one of them. 2 or 3 player stack from the White Sox definitely is viable on the slate. And then finally, Lane Thomas, who I think is also a core play. He's hitting the ball really well so far this season. He's had hits in quite a few straight games. for him. So I like his upside here, including the fact that he has home run potential and he can get multi-hit games, and the matchup is really solid here. So moving over to FanDuel, I'm just going to run through my plays real quick here. So for pitchers, Valdez and Gosman are the top two options. Then Kershaw is kind of a riskier third option at that price point, and then two value options are Heaney and Lynn, who both have some upside on FanDuel here. Moving into the catchers and first baseman, we're going to look at Vlade Jr. and Freddie Freeman are their top two options, and then some value plays are Ty France and Vinny Pasquantino. Moving at second base, Jose Altuve looks like a near must play here on FanDuel simply because his price is cheap. But Marcus Semien is also in play as a really good solid option. At third base, you could definitely choose to use one of these guys as your utility spot as well. But Austin Riley and Alex Bregman both have really great metrics for this matchup, and they're priced really fairly. Josh Rojas is a contrarian option off of them, but he hasn't hit the ball particularly well yet this season. Moving to shortstop, we'll look at Corey Seager and Bo Bichette, who have really good metrics for this one, though Bichette is pretty expensive, and I think it's definitely possible to get Seager or Trey Turner in, as both of them have really good metrics for this game. You could also utilize one of these guys to put in your utility spot as well. And then in the outfield, I think there's just so much value available in the outfield today that they're really gonna help you pay up for your pitching or whatever position you want. Acuna and Alvarez are obviously top options. However, they're probably not that rosterable here on FanDuel due to the fact that there's not a ton of pitching that's really cheap enough to make it so you can roster a couple 4,000 plus guys. But Kyle Tucker, George Springer, and Corbin Carroll are top tier options. And Toscar Hernandez, Lane Thomas, and Ian Happ are also in play on the slate. Tucker and Corbin are usually over $5,000 on DraftKings, and so getting them at around $3,000 on FanDuel is pretty wild. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. And make sure to drop your comments below when it comes to home runs, and have a nice day, guys.